morning, everyone. My name is Michael Seal. I'm the Vice President, Research and Innovation at the University of Windsor. I'm very pleased to be here to be the moderator for the first panel discussion. Today, we are fortunate to have three excellent panelists, and they are here today to share with us their knowledge and experience. So what I'm going to do is to invite them in turn to come and speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll follow up with a session of discussion and exchange. I will invite the panelists to be brave and ask each other questions, and I will invite you, the audience, to come and ask them probing questions as well. So the first speaker of this panel is Bill Merlingham. Bill is the Director of Research at Unifor. Prior to joining the union in 1998, Bill worked as a research economist, financial analyst, and policy advisor in the Ontario Ministry of Labour. So Bill holds a graduate degree in industrial relations from Queen's University. So for a longer version of Bill's bibliography, please consult the program that we have over here. So without further ado, Bill.
Morning. John, we're good? Thanks very much. Thanks for that wonderful introduction and the opening remarks. It's a great pleasure to be in front of you here, and I'd like to thank Matt and his organizing team and the University of Windsor, of course, and the sponsors for inviting us here this morning. From my perspective, I think this is an incredible first to have, obviously, the business community, to have labor, to have the academic world together in a practical forum to discuss important issues, and really not just discuss them, but work its way towards solutions. And so I'd like to thank you for that. You know, Alan Odette made some great remarks this morning about taking the politics out of policy, and hopefully I can contribute a little bit to that discussion. Now, in preparing this, Matt said keep it short, and he also said make it interesting. I know I can deliver on the first one. We'll see if the second one comes true. The contribution is about business and labor perceptions and reality. And really, I have a few general points to make, and then about the role of trade unions in the economy, and then focus a little bit more about the auto industry, something so near and dear to this community. And hopefully raise some challenges, provoke some thoughts, and really it's about finding some of the common ground, because I think Dino said it well, that we work together and we find those. So I have less than 10 minutes. I have 8 myths to go through. Let's see if I can get this to work here. Hopefully some bold insights as well this morning. So 8 myths. I'll hopefully deal with them really quickly and open some thoughts and some discussions for us here this morning. First one to get right out of the way, a myth we've heard all the time. Unions are bad for the business environment. Now, I promised as a researcher and economist not to bury you with too many numbers, and you won't be able to see them all. I do want to just challenge this myth right off the front and talk about this very fact. That when you look around the rankings of the global business environment, you see there, you're not going to be able to see all the numbers, the global ranking of different countries, and beside it you see the level of collective bargaining in the economy. Now, these are not rankings from left-wing UN organizations. This is Forbes, who talks about the best business environment. This is the World Economic Forum of CEOs who meet in Davos, Switzerland, and they come up with their most competitive business environments. And of course, you have the economist and Grant Thornton, who work together and put out something called business dynamism. I'm not sure exactly what they're measuring, but what I draw your attention to is that what we see here is throughout all of these is a number of the very top competitive and best business environments are those that have some of the very highest levels of collective bargaining in the economy. Whether it's Denmark, Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands, Norway, and others, regularly rank at the very top of the competitiveness scale. And as well, they have deep, deep levels of unionization and collective bargaining in the economy. And so again, I think maybe it's not causal, but certainly in environments where you have the best business environment, you can have a very strong trade union presence. And in fact, I would argue that trade unions contribute to that very competitive business environment. So that's the first myth. The second myth I'd like to talk about here, unions get in the way of a productive workplace. Now again, why would trade unions add value into the business environment, as shown by that first slide? A couple of points I'd like to raise on that. The reality is, I'd offer that trade unions actually improve the workforce and the overall business environment. How does that work? A couple of things. First off, trade unions, if you value labor higher, that means that firms and organizations are going to spend more time investing in skills and investing in training of their own workforce, and labor may become, from a macro perspective, more expensive, which means you're going to invest and you're going to move up the value chain. And that's something that we see throughout. Looking at individual organizations, trade union in the workplace provides a voice. And this is something that's incredibly important. We see the research shows that in organizational structures, having a process and a dialogue that is real and credible adds tremendously to the organization's performance. That's why we see very many large organizations that try and emulate something like a trade union, even if they don't have one. For example, I'm thinking of Magna, I'm thinking of a few other leading firms as well that create these processes and structures inside the workplace. So again, that's one point. Another point is, it sounds a little bit obvious, but when you have a collective agreement in a workplace, what you find is a mechanism for dealing with upturns and downturns in the economy very simply. You think of perhaps Germany that weathered the economic recession very well by their almost clockwork ability to have people come and go from the workforce, all in a system that is predetermined and done very well. So again, that is something that you achieve in the workplace. And finally, one point I would raise, you hear a lot in the media these days about the millennial generation, about the next generation of workers. Workplace culture matters. Young people, the most talented people, will turn down higher paying jobs. They'll turn down certain environments because they want fairness in the workplace, and that matters tremendously to them. And again, that's something that trade unions can bring into the individual workplace. The third myth that I like to raise here, we don't shy away from saying some of the bold lines that we hear in the debate, in the discussion, that trade unions are killing off manufacturing jobs. And again, I think that is a terrible myth, something that we do hear at times, and the reality is not at all the case. Obviously, the factors that have affected manufacturing over the last decade are far beyond the scope of a trade union. Things like the inflated Canadian dollar, our trade regime, our lack of overall policy is something to really consider. And it's kind of a divisive dig, I would think. But the latest statistics actually point out that since the recession in Ontario, unionized manufacturing has actually climbed by about 20,000 jobs, whereas non-union manufacturing is down by 40,000 jobs. Now again, I will be the last person to applaud any kind of job loss, and the impact that has on communities and families is tremendous, but I think we need to look at those facts and consider that no, there's no evidence to suggest that a trade union is in fact the cause of job loss. There are other issues involved as well. And again, maybe, just maybe I would offer that the trade union can play a stabilizing force in those scenarios. So let me turn my attention a little bit to the auto industry. And again, another bold myth that we hear out there is that unions make Canada a high-cost jurisdiction for the auto industry. And again, I think to challenge some of that myth, let me offer a few points. The reality is that labor costs in auto production are only about 4% of the total cost of the vehicle. This is something I think is very counterintuitive to most consumers. Most citizens would have no idea that in fact that the labor that the automakers pay for is such a small share of the overall piece of the pie. So again, we ask that there's some perspective on this. Let me just offer a bit of information about this. Automakers typically these days will do final production. They'll make the engines and transmissions in-house. Beyond that, almost everything else is outsourced. So they pay about 29 hours worth of labor to build your vehicle. And those all-in costs, even though we debate with some of the employers about it, it's about $1,700 a vehicle. That's about 4% of a $41,000 car, which is the average of what our members make in Canada. So again, I think when we're talking about the auto industry and the role of labor and the competitive position of Canada, we have to remember that 96% of the cost structure lays outside of their direct workforce. And again, this gives us some perspective. Now, despite this, during our last round of negotiations in 2012, we made sure that we were fully comparable with the American labor costs, and that was when the dollar was at par. The dollar has now declined by 10 cents, and again, dramatically improved that comparison. And also, when we look at non-union workforces in Canada, Toyota, we've recently had a major engagement with the Toyota workforce, and they have a very similar level of compensation. So again, I think the point to make about labor costs in auto production, boy, does it make good sport. It's a lot of fun sometimes to have a Punch and Judy show, to have a great big debate about it. But in fact, you need to keep some perspectives on what the overall cost drivers are for the industry, how the business model functions, and to see labor in its right perspective. Let me raise this question, another myth here, that unionized workers mean low quality and poor productivity. And again, nothing can be further from the truth. On an obvious level, most people who get up in the morning and work hard are inherently proud of the work they do. And again, they understand, everyone understands that the success of the firm matters to their livelihood. It's the core of their stability. The reality is, when you look at the Canadian auto industry, is that the workers have been building to the highest levels of quality and peak level productivity on any measure. Year in and year out, we could go on and on about it, but the unionized assembly plants in Canada score at the very top levels of quality, productivity. One of the benchmark measures is something called the J.D. Power Quality Awards, and every year plants where our members work come out near the top. Last one that was available for 2013, a Chevy Camaro, Impala, Chrysler Town & Country built right here in Windsor with the top vehicles for quality, and other vehicles were in the top 3. General Motors Oshawa plant wins the second level highest award for their quality throughout North America and South America. And the productivity, folks in the auto industry may remember the days where something called the Harbor reports. This was probably the most detailed in-plant productivity assessment study ever undertaken. It went on for over a decade, and they measured every hour and every minute that went into every vehicle. And our plants here in Canada came out regularly on top. The current statistics say the same. And of course, we just had this year the Windsor minivan plant be awarded the silver designation in world-class manufacturing by Chrysler, indicating that they are the best performing plant in their system in North America. So again, I think one of the points to get here on the common ground is this idea that the workforce and the workers in Canada and the trade union is a partner in that work. It takes it with a great deal of pride. Let me raise one more myth here about the auto industry, and the unions in the auto industry perhaps are there for a thing of the past. Often we'll hear that it's a changing world, a changing global environment, and in fact, when you look the world over, what you find is that the entire global auto industry, probably somewhere north of 90%, is organized. Why would that be? These are complex organizational structures with many thousands of workers in them, and having a system and a process to find consensus and find an agreement is something that workers have chosen and the companies have been dealing with since their formation. When you think of all of the European Union, global firms like VW, Mercedes, BMW, Audi, et cetera, all unionized. Japan, all unionized. Korea, all of Mexico is unionized. Almost all of South America. When we took a detailed look very recently at the 60 plants that Toyota has around the world, in every continent, 90% of them are organized. So really, only in the US and Canada do we see any non-union manufacturing in the auto assembly industry among developed nations. And it's a rarity. And perhaps if we're looking for more stability, we might need more unions rather than less. When we look at global growth, the places where the industry is growing, we're seeing stronger trade union movement. And in fact, in China, the trade union movement is taking steps towards independence and being a real independent actor. My seventh myth to discuss here this morning is about investment. And this is something that is critical and core to this community, a very alive and ongoing discussion about the future. And what we hear so often, perhaps, is that what matters is low wages and low taxes. And these are the drivers of automotive investment and how Canada and Windsor will win the game on this front. The reality is, of course, that there are dozens and dozens of factors that go into major automotive investment decisions. Each decision weights them differently. You're not going to be able to read that from where you are, but some of the obvious ones are questions about energy costs and equipment tooling, land costs, proximity to markets, trade access, whether or not they have access through different agreements, transportation infrastructure, training costs, the supply base, et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera. It is not a simple matter of measuring wages and low taxes and somehow coming to the conclusion that we are going to succeed and secure the next level of investment. And I think that's a very important thing when we're thinking about policy, is to recognize that this is a very complex structure, and there are many, many variables. Some of them are open to decision-making by government, and some of them aren't. And we need to see the whole package for what it is and move beyond some of the simplistic thinking around what we need for automotive investment. And the eighth and final myth that I would like to raise here, and this is perhaps the most important and I would think possibly the most damaging myth that needs to be challenged, is that Canada already has an automotive policy. The reality is far from that. We have a few bits and pieces here, but nothing comprehensive at all. And you know, when we think about automotive policy, why should Canada have an automotive policy? I think it's obvious. Everyone, every other jurisdiction in the world wants what we already have. And governments are incredibly active in trying to secure it. Whether or not it's state-level governments across the border, whether or not it's international, in Mexico, and Brazil, and China, and elsewhere, they want it because the automotive industry, from an economic development perspective, is the goose that lays the golden egg. It is the one that creates 10-to-1 job spin-offs, creates an entire infrastructure and a supply base, and of course, everybody wants a piece of that. You know, when you look at the tools and the policy toolkit that other jurisdictions are developing, it is not just about taxes or even just about investment support. It's trade, it's technological development, it's skills development, it's dedicated infrastructure, and others. So again, a lot of key pieces in here. One of the things I would raise about automotive policy is that it must be long-term. It must be sustained, it must be engaged, and it cannot change like the winds. I think back to the opening comments from Alan about the politics and the policies. What's interesting when you think about active policies for the industry, even in the US South, it goes across the whole political spectrum. Places, the deeply conservative governments in the US South, Texas, and others, where you might not imagine, have very aggressive policies to build their automotive industry and attract investment, and Canada is lagging deeply behind it. The final thing I would say here is that unions play a big role in this dialogue. In 2012, we launched a major campaign talking about the industry raising a number of solutions. And again, our role in this is to help build that consensus, to lead some of the discussions, to work with our partners, and again, to get that attention in front of the decision makers, because they have many, many competing priorities, and labor has to partner with the business community and every other actor to get this. So in sum, we have a big role to play in this. We want to partner with our business and other community allies, because this is vital work. There's a lot to be done. Now is absolutely the time that Canada has to up its game in the automotive policy in particular. And I would applaud the organizers, because it's discussions like this, it's forums like this, where that dialogue and discussion happens. And at the end of the day, I know we're going to have a whole bunch of solutions to carry this forward. So thank you for your attention this morning. And I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Bill, for your insight and for tackling the myth head-on. I know the auto policy is in the mind of a lot of us, so hopefully in the discussion session, you know, this will be a lively exchange, and hopefully a solution will come out of it. So the next panelist to speak is George King. George is a labor lawyer. He has practiced law in the city of Windsor since 1982 and is currently with McCabe. George has devoted his practice to representing employers and labor and employment matters. He is a former president of the Chamber and George is married to Kimberly, and they have 6 children. George.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Chamber, and thank you to Local 444 and the trade union movement for this, at the University of Windsor for this historic event. When I was at university, I had a professor fumbling around with his glasses one day in philosophy. That's where I started. And eventually got done. He put the glasses in his pocket. He said, "Let me tell you, middle age is a shipwreck." Well, my ship has arrived today. I don't need the glasses to do this. I'll take them off. Alan Odette, you started saying, there's no big business coming to Ontario anymore. In the 90s, it was kind of a cruel joke going around. Is, how do you start a big business in Ontario? Sorry, how do you start? I missed that up already. How do you start a small business in Ontario? Start a big one and wait. And it's that myth that we have to eliminate. And we have to eliminate it quite quickly because the pace of growth in the rest of the world is so fast. And with globalization, we're going to get buried if we don't act soon and we don't act cooperatively. Now, I have the craziest job in the world. Many even think I'm crazy, but it is the craziest job in the world. I spend most of my days negotiating collective agreements. I've been doing it for over 32 years. I haven't counted, but I can easily estimate I've negotiated well over 500 collective agreements in just about every sector of our economy, public and private. And I have the craziest job because my job is to go and represent employers in collective bargaining and make sure that the deal is satisfactory to the employer so they can continue on whatever path they have taken, be they private or public. But yet the deal has to be good enough that at a ratification meeting, which is this kind of crazy process that union conducts where they get people in a room and ask them to kind of decide their next 3 years or more of their future in an hour or 2 hours of a session, and that's a very volatile process. And so to be in employer council, you kind of have to have an understanding of what it takes to get deals ratified. And yet I've never been to a ratification meeting in my life. So I think the long-term outcome of what we've started here today, and this may sound a little crazy yet, is if it works, you're going to need a little less of guys like me. Because there has to be a change in the way business and labor work together in Ontario if we're going to move forward in a successful way. And Bill, not to debate all of your points, and would be, quite frankly, that would have been just those points. We probably could debate them all morning. All I want to say is I agree with a lot of what you said, not everything, a lot of what you said, but I noted where you talked about the degree of unionization, that to me it's a different model of unionization. It's industry-wide in many of those jurisdictions. And while we may never get to a union-wide system here in Ontario or in Canada or North America, I think we have to start acting like we have that. And so with that, my topic today is called Modernizing Our Industrial Workplace Relationships, the Need for Canadian Auto Sector Policy. Nobody told me, but I think I hit that one. There we go. So, here we go. What are today's joint labor management challenges for automotive manufacturing and transportation in southwestern Ontario? And I added transportation to that because it's a key component. Because as the world gets smaller and as other countries are able to develop the skills and the equipment and the necessary ability to manufacture automotive parts in particular cheaper with the same quality potentially and get them here because of transportation costs, that is a factor that we have to take into account. Totally unrelated, but I read this amazing article in the New York Times a few years ago about a town that many of you have probably been through, may not have stayed, in California. If you've ever gone from San Francisco down south, you go through a town called Gilroy. And anybody that knows anything about Gilroy, California knows that it is the garlic capital of the world. In fact, if you drive through Gilroy on most days, it smells like you're standing outside the Cook Shop restaurant here in Windsor. Now, the odor of garlic just pervades the place. Well, they're having trouble in Gilroy. The cooperative there, I think it's called St. Christopher's, and there's another one, Gilroy Garlic. They're having trouble these days because garlic is a commodity. And the commodity, it can be grown anywhere, just about, in the world. And of course, where is it growing in vast quantities now? China. And the garlic is grown in China. It's harvested. It's packaged or whatever in bulk. It's loaded on ships. It sails to the United States of America. There's a 450% duty on it, and it's half the price of Gilroy garlic. So if we don't, those are the kinds of things. So how do you compete with that? You know, you double the tariff, maybe. But the bottom line is we have to work together. So how do we remain a significant player in the global automotive business when things can come here at considerably less cost? And when we are no longer, the reality is we are no longer in a situation where the main manufacturers of automotive cars and automobiles and trucks in this jurisdiction can be laissez-faire about their own costs. So the pressure that they're putting on the suppliers, many of whom I represent, or our firm represents, are intense. And the discussions have changed over 30 years, whereas at one time, employers were saying to me in bargaining, okay, well, if we do this, we can still make some money, we can do this. Now they're worried about saying if they give this increase, they're going to have to increase their price, but they've been told by their supplier or their customer if they don't reduce their price by 3% each year, they're going to lose the work. And so they're running up against that. And so we've got to find a way to get through that. We've got to find a way to work cooperatively, because notwithstanding what Bill's saying, and a lot of what he said in his numbers were right, in the last 10 years, we've fallen from the 8th largest automotive sector in the world to the 10th. And look who's moved ahead of us: Brazil, Mexico, India. Now, a lot of those cars are being made for those markets, but believe me, they'll be making them for here if they can. Now, how do we tackle these things? The question is, are excessive rates of inflation for healthcare and energy costs preventing real wage growth? And I say they are in Ontario. In collective bargaining, my clients are generally facing renewal costs for their benefits running annually in the double digits. Double digits. Rates of inflation are low, interest rates are low, benefit levels are increasing at double-digit pace. I recently had a client looking at a 17% increase. And this wasn't some little small employer with 20 employees that had a skewed, or 30 employees that had a skewed experience rating. This was a large employer with over 1,000 employees, and they were facing a 17% cost increase. They can't increase their prices by 17%. We all know that. And the same, obviously, with energy. I know we're going to talk more about that today. I read it. I think it was yesterday. I read in the paper. There's 11,000 people in the province of Ontario today working in hydroelectric, making over $100,000 a year. Max, I don't begrudge you or any of your key people the salary, but that number just struck me as amazingly high. And we need that many six-figure salaries to produce the electric power in this province. So what we're seeing in what I'm involved in is we're seeing the more frequent introduction of things in the benefit area. Benefit premiums, more sharing, higher co-pays for things like prescriptions, cafeteria-style benefits where employees can choose the benefits they want in an effort to try and reduce overall costs by not having the employer pay for a bunch of benefits that don't get used. And we're seeing things like more frequent recall on recurring treatments such as dental and things like that. But there's a lot to be done. Another issue is the defined benefit pension plan on life support. I've been practicing over 32 years. I can tell you, I've negotiated a ton of collective agreements. I have never yet negotiated the first contract or started with the first contract where later on a defined benefit pension plan has been introduced. This is a major issue for the clients that have defined benefit pension plans. It's every single client I have with a defined benefit pension plan. When we are in bargaining, it is probably the predominant issue. How do we control these costs, these unaccounted for liabilities that have to be accrued on the books that affect the financial creditworthiness of the business and therefore potentially affect credit ratings and things like that. DB plans are being frozen, they're also being converted, and DC plans are the norm. Now, I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, but it's creating a dichotomy in this province where you have some people with DC plans and DB plans and more without. But where are we going to go with pension reform? Where are we going to go with controlling these costs? So how do management and labor better work together to jointly survive in this age of globalization? And it's not something you might want to hear me say, but to quote my distant relative, Rodney King from Los Angeles, can't we all just get along? Business and labor need to understand they are not really each other's adversaries anymore. Rather, they need to be partners, jointly challenging the real threats to their existence. charge each other. I think those days are gone. The days of bravado of unions saying, that's not going to be the way it is, and owners and managers of businesses saying, over my dead body, will they get X or will I do Y? We've got to find a way to sit down collectively in each and every situation and say, what are the long-term objectives of the company? What are the long-term objectives of the union for its employees, and how do we best achieve those? And what is common, and what's common, how can we work together with that? And what's not common, how do we find a way to solve those problems? Yeah, global competitiveness is going to deteriorate, I think, the loyalty of many customers to your respective businesses over time if we don't start working together. Another major problem, Bill touched on this as well, is Canada's natural resource industry. So they undermine the Canadian auto industry in the case for an auto policy, which I'm here to support. In my opinion, and I don't think Bill would disagree with this, much of the growth, and there was substantial growth in the automotive sector from the 70s until not too long ago in Ontario and in Canada. But with all due respect to everybody involved in that, I think a large part of it was caused by the decline in the value of the Canadian dollar. And I actually had clients when the dollar started rising. I had one client, decent-sized auto parts manufacturer. They were making a profit of about $1 million a year. And when the currency went up about 15 cents, they came to me and they said, we're toast. I said, what do you mean we're toast? He said, well, we've now realized. We didn't realize it when we were busy making parts and getting them out the door and expediting this and double-checking the quality on that and getting new business. We didn't really understand it. But turns out the only profit we were making was on currency exchange. And so we've got to find a way to adjust that. I saw a paper, Bill, I don't know if you had anything to do with it, Jim Sanford wrote it years ago. It said, for there to be parity in the automotive sector in North America, the Canadian dollar needed to be at 73 cents US. And that's where the interplay with our natural resources comes in. Because what's happened is with globalization, an increased need for various minerals and fertilizer and lumber and timber throughout the world, we've been, as a country, a huge benefactor of that because we're rich in natural resources. And Michael Wilson, the former federal finance minister, said, Canada spent the first 100 years of its existence living off its natural resources. It spent the next 25 years living off its credit. He said that back in 1992. And it's kind of a scary thing, but we've got to find a way to balance. I'm concerned a little bit, to be blunt. I told Ken Zalenta, you've merged with the CP, which is big in natural resources. So I'm concerned there's a bit of an internal fight there that's got to be worked out. Exchange rates, they've tempered, they've risen a little. But again, if we're going to have an auto policy, there has to be a good currency policy as well. It has to be maintained. Surely the vicissitudes of interest rates and currency exchanges can't be the sole deciding factor in whether our auto business succeeds. Now, can we better understand what unions are selling now that wage increases have flatlined? And I make no mistake about it. I've written articles about it. And notwithstanding, how unions tout social justice and all of the things that they do, and a lot of them they do very, very well. They're still a business. They don't want to call themselves that, but they're still a business, and they're selling a product to members. That's how they get members, is saying, you need to join us because we're going to get you better wages, better benefits, more job security, layoff procedures, you go on and on. You can stay here all day and list the things. And so unions are selling these things. But wages have really flatlined. Even the unions are acknowledging there's no what I call growth anymore. I'm not facing collective bargaining where people are making $12 an hour and the market rate is 18 and they're getting 18 over the life of a contract. They're lucky to get 2% in the current environment. So I think collectively we've got to find out, okay, what is it that unions are selling to their members, and how do we work with them so that if we have a union or we get a union, we end up in a situation where they're doing what they're doing and their members are getting good value for it, but it's not inhibiting or restricting the future of the business. I'm going to try and wrap up pretty quick here. The rise in the dollar, or more importantly, the fall of the U.S. dollar over the last 10 years, puts us not in a real wage growth, but compared to the U.S. dollar, second hitting there over 2002 to 2010, the real wage growth in Canada for the auto sector was 83%, 84%, vis-a-vis the U.S. If you look at the U.S., there's only 6.9% because their dollar kept flat. And so again, this balance has gone back and forth, and people, they follow the money. And and what's really scary, and I know this is kind of a cruel thing to say, but I've had situations, where I talk to you and say, I've had situations where companies paying $23, $24 an hour need a bit of relief. And at the same, and the union is saying no to that because we don't take concessions. We don't agree with that. It's kind of a one-way door. And yet I guarantee you, if Chrysler Canada or any of the big Detroit three put an ad in the paper tomorrow that they were going to hire 1,000 people in Windsor at $15 an hour, and the hiring was going here at the Kubota Club, we have a ring around this Kubota Club that I don't know how many times the lineup would go around. So we've got this disconnect between what we can afford to pay and what we can pay. And finally, the last thing I want to leave you with is we're looking for ideas, and my idea is this. How do we get an auto policy? That's for people a lot smarter than I. But what I'd like to see is this: if the unions are going to be part of the plan with us, with business, to move things forward, and you're in the business of selling representation, why not prepare shelf agreements? Why not publish shelf agreements that say, if you're in the parts sector, if you're a stamper, if you're a tool and die business, or if you're in transportation, here is what we will agree to for a 5-year period should you become unionized. We'll agree to a contract that pays X, provides these basic benefits, and then if you're unionized, there's less fear. There'll be less fear on the part of employers, less resistance to having a trade union, at least for a 5-year incubation period, and take away the uncertainty. Because right now, my clients that aren't unionized live in fear that if they get unionized, within 3 or 4 months, they're going to have a strike deadline put on them, they won't have an inventory, and they'll lose the Chrysler business because, or GM or Ford or Toyota, or whoever they're making the parts for, because if the cost goes up 5%, they're out of the market because of all the conditions that we both talked about. So that's a lot of information and probably more than 10 minutes worth. I hope it was helpful and informative. And like I say, if it results in guys like me having less work in the years ahead, then you've done a good job. Thank you for your time and attention.
Well, thank you, George, for your insights from the employer's perspective. Now I'm going to invite Peter Fry to come and deliver perhaps a bit more of an academic perspective. So Peter is the Scientific Director and CEO of Auto 21, a network of centers of excellence headquartered at the University of Windsor. So as we all know, Auto 21 brings together researchers, graduate students from 46 institutes in partnership with over 110 industry and public sector companies to engage in applied automotive R&D. So Auto 21 has an annual budget of about $11 million, and it has been estimated that the return of investment for industrial partners in collaborating with Auto 21 is a factor of 12 to 1. So without further ado, Peter.
Thanks very much, Michael. Very good. Okay, well, I'm not really an academic. I'm an engineer who works for a university, and it's quite a different thing. But I really appreciate being here, and I want to really thank Matt and his group and Alan Conway and his folks for doing all of this. I think it's a tremendous initiative, and really pleased to be part of it. So I'm an engineer, so I like data, and I only have 312 slides. So we're going to have to go fairly fast here. This is a production summary for the globe, for global vehicle production. And the thing you need to focus on is that number right there. Now this is just a forecast from one forecaster, and there are many, many forecasters, and their numbers vary up and down by 5 or 8 or 10 or 12%. But basically, by about 2017 or so, or just a bit later than that, there'll be about 100 million vehicles produced in the world. Okay? And that's an important number to keep in your mind. You can see where the growth is, the big blue stripe at the bottom. Most of the growth is in Asia. There's relatively little growth anywhere else. This is a slide which shows vehicle production capacity, and that's an important one too, because basically that shows how many cars we could build if we could sell them. And the number to focus on there is the one at the right, 134 million vehicles. So we're going to sell about 100 million, and we could sell 134 million. So there's about 30 million units of capacity too much in the world. And that's a very bad thing, because that represents waste. That represents empty plants and laid off workers and so on and so forth. So matching capacity to sales is really an important thing. And that's what you see on this slide, which is basically just for North America. You can see that little green line across the top is the percent utilization, which the companies are all striving to have all their plants busy all the time, because then they don't have any capital sitting around wasting time, and the workers, of course, are busy earning a living, and that's great. This represents waste. All of that, all those little red circles are really waste, and that's the problem. Another interesting thing is what's going to happen in North America's vehicle production. What kind of vehicles will be built in the coming years? Well, this is a bit of a challenging picture, and this is just one company's forecast. But these things are usually, reasonably based on pretty careful analysis. And what this seems to show is that somewhere around 2019 or so, in about 5 or so years, the production of large cars in North America may taper right off. And I guess we just have to ask ourselves, do we make any large cars in Canada? Because we're going to get hurt if that happens. So this is investment pouring into some parts of North America, and you can see that really the big winner is Mexico here and the Southeast United States. And of course, there have been headlines in the paper about the lack of automotive investment in Canada, and I think this goes very much towards what the previous two speakers said. The game we've been playing for a long time is starting to work less and less effectively. This is another interesting slide. And what this really shows is the number of vehicles built per plant. And basically, from 2000, you can't really look back just 5 years, because 5 years ago there was a massive recession and sales volumes were cut in half. So it really is not a very representative piece of data. But if you go back to 2000, the number of vehicles built per plant has gone up 25%. And if you look down below, the number of different models produced in a given plant has gone up by 20%. Now what that means is that if you have an auto plant, you make as many cars as you can in it, and you make as many different kinds of cars as you can in it, so you can respond to the market. Price of fuel goes down, big cars become popular. Price of fuel goes up, little cars become popular, and so on and so forth. The market moves around all the time, and the car companies are constantly shifting what they build so that they can respond to that marketplace. And the issue is that if you've got a factory, you want it to be agile and fast, and you want to produce a lot of cars. And this, again, drives us towards a policy of encouraging flexible plants. Okay. So this slide, this is the Toyota Corolla, and there'll be a test later, so you need to write down all the information and the little balloons around. This is a slide from Automotive News, and basically what this shows you is some of the suppliers to the Toyota Corolla. This is very much akin to what Bill was saying earlier. The car companies don't build the whole car. They put it together. They decide what it will look like and more or less what it's made out of and its major performance characteristics. But about 70 to 80% of the parts come from the parts companies. And it's not like the old days where they sort of throw a drawing in the front door and say, make 200,000 of those and paint them black. Now the parts companies have to design the parts, they deal with the materials issues, they do the manufacturing processes and all the logistics, and they're responsible for getting the parts to the assembly plant on time every day. And if your truck slides off the road with a load of seat frames, you'll be flying them in. That's why they always put auto plants right beside big airports. So keep in mind that the auto parts sector is really a key one. We don't own any car companies in Canada. We own a lot of auto parts companies. So let's look at some technological trends quickly. I grabbed some data for a sort of a representative car that's pretty popular. In 1981, the Ford Escort, and the 2013 Ford Focus. If you look at that data, you can see the kind of progress which has been made on performance. And keep in mind, the Focus has fuel injection, cam facing, airbags, ABS brakes, HID headlights, air conditioning, screen power, windows power, steering power, brakes power, seats, heated mirrors, satellite radio, Bluetooth phone, and it starts every time, and it goes and turns and stops better, and it's quieter, and it does not rust, and it costs less in $1981 than the Escort costs in 1981. I had an 81 Escort. It was a pretty good little car, but the 2013 Focus is a way better car, and it's actually cheaper, so it's quite amazing. But it's not even close to good enough yet, because this is going to happen, and this is CAFE, corporate average fuel economy. Now, I know I'm going fast, but the takeaway from this slide is that the fuel economy of a 2025 car, the average car that's sold, is going to have to be about twice as high as the fuel economy of a 2010 car. About twice as high. Fuel economy will double between now or between 5 years ago and 2025. Well, you cannot do that by sort of putting a spoiler on the trunk lid and putting a new stripe down the side of the car. You have to completely change what the car is made out of, how it functions, how it's made, how it's put together, and so on and so forth. And you're starting to see this now. Lots more hybrids, the auto-electrical vehicle, very sophisticated climate control systems in the car, very sophisticated engines, transmissions with 8 and 9 and even 10 speeds. Ford is going to build the F-150 out of aluminum. I'm an engineer, and I cannot tell you how profound a change that is. The difference between steel and aluminum is like the difference between spaghetti and toast. It's completely different material. It won't even be remotely the same. And I'm confident they'll get it right, but it is a huge technical challenge. General Motors announced a few weeks ago they will be doing the Silverado in aluminum in 5 years. So this is a big deal. This is going to require a heck of a lot more R&D and a lot more innovation, which is good for me. That's what I do. Now here's some interesting numbers. Globally, global vehicle production in 2011 was about 77 million. In 2012, 81 million. Look at the product development expenditures. That's R&D and product development. That's not necessarily some prof looking through a microscope with a white lab coat on. That's what it takes to actually develop new car models. Almost $100 billion in each of those years. That means the average car in those years absorbed around $1,230 to $1,250 in product development costs. In Canada, you see the comparable numbers. This is what we're spending on vehicle R&D in Canada. We're out by a factor of 6. We're not even close. We're way down. And I just told you, and I think you understand that the future vehicle in the next decade is going to have a lot of R&D done to meet those fuel economy targets. So this is a challenging picture for us. Now, I'm not for a minute suggesting that we're going to get to $1,200 per car. That just can't happen because we don't do certain kinds of R&D here in Canada because we don't own any car companies here. But we own a lot of parts companies, and 70 to 80% of the parts come from parts companies and all the technology that goes along with it. So let's look at our place in the auto sector. We have 8. Well, you can read it. I'm not going to read it to you. I guess the key one is that the swing in production from 1.8 to 2.5 million vehicles per year. It's been as high as 3 million vehicles per year, but it's trending downwards. This is a very large industry, and it creates a lot of value and a lot of employment, but it's trending downwards for us, unfortunately. So I just wanted to show you some of those numbers so you can absorb that for a second. Bringing it closer to home, this is the tooling spend. This is the tools, dies, and molds, the kind of stuff that's made right here in our city. This is Windsor products. Now, these aren't numbers specifically for Windsor. This is for all of North America. But Windsor is a North American center of this kind of work. It's sort of invisible. The consumer never sees this. This isn't the dashboard in your car. It's the thing that made the dashboard. But that's great work to have. Look at the spend. It's $15 billion up there. Now let's look at what that money is actually spent on and how much of it might stick around here. Look at that. The labor. That stays around here. The people who work in those shops live here. Now the material, a lot of it comes from elsewhere. The overhead, That a lot of that stays around here, and so on and so forth. A lot of the engineering charges and SJM profit and so on. So this is Windsor business right here, and this is going to grow if we have the products to sell. If we have the products to sell, and I could bury you with data about what's going to happen in the auto industry in the next few years, as far as the number of products and so on. But this is our opportunity right here. What's our competition? Well, that slide did. I'm sorry. It's Mexico. Look at the little. This one doesn't have a pointer, but in the middle, see that bar chart there? Mexico up 61.7% between 2012 and 2020. The U.S. up 12%. Canada down 20%. Not good. Here's an interesting picture. By 2015, production is expected to exceed 90 million units, driven by a recovery in the U.S. and continued growth in Asia. At present, Canada is the only region not showing a projected increase in production. We must change this picture. Everything that Bill said and everything that George said about that is correct. We cannot keep playing this game any longer. This is not working. Now, I have a brief expose on a strategy that we at Auto 21 have been working on. It's our view that we have to turn Canada into a product development hub for auto parts and auto parts tooling and so on. We have a way, a mechanism we've been working on to do that. This is a very complicated slide. The thing I want you to focus on is the green thing along the bottom. Basic research, these are called technology readiness levels. When you design something new, the process goes through 9 different stages of technology readiness levels. This comes from NASA, the people who do space exploration in the US. Basic research are technology levels 1, 2, and 3. Commercialization are technology levels 8 and 9. In the middle, that's the big gap in Canada. We don't do very much of that here. We're really good at 1, 2, and 3. That's what the universities do and the research institutes, the NRC and so on. Very, very good at that. Some of the best in the world. And I've got statistics that prove that. And our companies are really good. Our workers are good. We have great machine tools. We're really quite good at that kind of stuff. It's in the middle. It's where the products get developed that we have a great big gap. And if we don't fill that gap, we're going to lose our shirts. We've done a big survey. I've got a copy of it right there of 25 companies that we found that with a properly designed program, and I'm not a big advocate of lots and lots of public sector spending on this kind of stuff, but to be honest with you, if all of your competitors are doing something and it's working for them and you're not doing it, then I think we need to look carefully at how we go forward. A properly designed program could create, just among the 25 companies surveyed, almost 500 R&D jobs. And each of those 500 R&D jobs spins off something like 8 to 10 other jobs. And that number comes from Canadian manufacturers and exporters. A lot of incremental investment would take place and so on and so forth. And the point is, what comes out of that exercise are products that lots and lots of other people can build and that we can sell to the world. We are an export nation, and we have to grow as an export nation. Here's some basic rules of the program we've been developing. They're actually fairly simple. I know there's a lot of words on there, but basically the program would pay for half the cost of a product development project, and most of those costs would be repaid once the profits started to flow. And it's important that profits flow. And that's my talk, and I thank you very much for your attention. I know I really threw a lot at you.
Well, thank you, Peter. The floor is now open for questions, and we have about 10 minutes for questions and discussion, so please go ahead.
I just want to ask a question. We all owe a debt of gratitude to Simon Reason for negotiating the auto pact. Why have we lost such a and I don't know whether we ever had it. Why are we so low in the R&D piece? What's it going to take? Do we not have the infrastructure? Do we not have the why are we not getting that? What's the barrier to increasing that $200?
Well, that's a very good question. By the way, thank you very much for your remarks earlier about libraries. Libraries forever. Big fan of libraries. It's not a simple picture, but I guess, and I have to tell you, this doesn't come easily from a person who's at a university, but I think that it's been our perspective that Canada's basic approach of having universities do all of the R&D or do a lot of it, perhaps has not been as effective as people might have hoped. The fact of the matter is that we need more innovation within companies. Universities really are not designed to develop products. It's a happy story to think about, but it really doesn't work. And so I think that, as has been said earlier, our companies have done very well based on low dollar, a great education system, very strong healthcare, top-notch workers, and so on and so forth. But that's no longer enough. Now they have to be developing new products on a regular basis themselves. And only companies can do that. Only companies can be fast enough and secure enough. They're the only ones that have enough connection to the customer to know what needs to be developed, what its characteristics need to be, what the right price point is, and so on and so forth. Universities can contribute to that, and our program certainly talks about how universities can contribute. And by the way, this program has been reviewed carefully, and we have support from all 5 of the automakers, all the major parts manufacturers, Linamar, Westcast, Woodbridge, Magna, little companies, local companies, Valiant, Narmco, the CAW, or I'm sorry, Unifor supports it, and so I think it's the right kind of program. It gets right at the root of the problem with a solution that has been proven to work in other places.
Another question?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this policy presentation. I'm Mike Glover from Unifor, and one of the major industries in Canada is the auto industry, especially in Ontario. And I'm just questioning of why some of these political parties are so against the auto policy, because it's so important, especially in Windsor, Ontario. The tax base that it creates, that they get their money back within a couple of years. If anybody in the panel can question it, can answer that, I'd be happy to listen.
Thanks, Mike. That's an excellent question. To be honest, I wish I had a good answer as to why. I think it's a bit of a lack of some maturity on the discussion. Perhaps that's part of what we're trying to do here at this forum today, is to get past some of those misconceptions about what needs to happen. And I think these become wedge issues. People are more interested in partisan politics than understanding the best practice in industrial policy. And I really think it's because people get sidetracked into other debates, partisan debates, and don't take the time and the attention to realize that other jurisdictions, other governments, the terrain of competition is all of the things that we would assume it is, and it's increasingly in advanced manufacturing. It's about which nation and which jurisdiction has the best industrial policies and the smartest practices, and people don't want to take the time for that. And so I would think that is part of the reason why. Hopefully we can turn some of that around through this kind of dialogue. But that's an excellent question. It's a $1 million question to this community as well.
Mike, I have a bit of thought on that too. It relates to a little bit of what I said, and that is that from the 70s through to the early noughts, the value of the Canadian dollar dropped, and auto businesses were doing very well. And I think we've been caught a little bit with our pants down now that the dollar has changed so dramatically. And I think as a business we're going, people are making a case to the politicians, so we need an auto strategy, we need this, and we need that. And they're saying, well, what are you talking about? You're getting 10% growth every year, and everything's going great. And bang, now we're in a situation where it's not so great. And I think, obviously, on a bit more of a macro level, I'm for an auto policy. Maybe I'm a bit biased because I live in Windsor and it affects me and my family and my friends and my neighbors and all the people in the room. But I think there needs to be a national, I mean, you just can't have an auto policy. And I think to a certain extent, sometimes Unifor gets criticized. They're arguing for this, and then the politicians are saying, yeah, but are we going to have one for, iron ore? Are we going to have one for salt mining and iron and whatever? Are we going to have one for pulp and paper? And I think we need to have a national strategy, and auto has to be, has to be a big part of that. And at present, it's certainly not.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question. So how, and to all the panelists, so how can we encourage, if you would, our politicians in the province, in the federal government, how do we encourage them to come up with a industrial policy that allow us to be more competitive versus our competition?
Well, I'll stick my oar in on that one. I think, first of all, we've been talking to both the Ontario and federal government about our ideas and our experiences over the last 13 and a half years of running Auto 21. And we're getting, I would say, a receptive ear, but government moves in measured ways, and it's easy to become impatient and start jumping up and down about this, and everybody who knows me knows I'm a real type A myself. But I think it's wise to look carefully before you leap. These are very, very large moves on the part of the government and our economy. But I think that there is certainly receptivity to the notion that things really have changed abroad, and that the game we're playing domestically is just not necessarily compatible anymore. And I think there is a move to look at something new, and I think that's very positive. And I think that those politicians who see it that way are to be congratulated.
Excellent question, of course. The comments I would offer, I think, is one, we need to break that dynamic that says policy, higher level strategies are something that labor wants, or something that business wants, or something that just one narrow interest group wants. That's part of what we're doing here. To advance that dialogue, I really think the simplest thing to do is adopt that language. It might sound like business speak to me, who I don't use that language very much, but that term best practice. What is the best practice currently in competing jurisdictions in advanced manufacturing? And when you look at that, it's a fairly impressive picture from the tools and levers and measures other jurisdictions will engage in. And it's a very dispiriting look at what our governments, in partnership with business and labor, have been able to bring forward. So I think if we can get past it being seen as some narrow interest, and then just say, you know what, we spend too much time looking in our own fishbowl, well, let's consider what the rest of the world is doing, and we'll find a lot of the solutions there as well.
I'm going to offer the chance of one last question.
Maybe I'll just throw in a comment here that may not be a question, but even though governments in Canada have not wanted national policies in terms of industry, if you think about an industry for which Canada has been complimented royally across the world, it's banking and insurance. And the only reason we have banking and insurance industry today in Canada is because of national regulation and national policies, okay? And although everything doesn't translate exactly, many parts of what we did in those areas would have served us well in other areas, and I think can, even though all parts don't. So I think if I were involved directly in these discussions, I would make government think about, where we've had real success with this, even though we've refused to do some things in other sectors. I don't know what if others think similarly, but I ask them to comment.
That's a great comment, Dean Conway. You know, I'm not a member of that political party, but I have no hesitation in saying Paul Martin saved Canada by maintaining the banking system that he did, so that when the collapse in 08 occurred, our banks, although they hurt somewhat, they were able to withstand it, unlike the collapse that happened in the United States. And the second thing is, you know, and this is going to sound funny, but you know, people like looking at cars, but the car industry isn't sexy anymore. And I just think about how quickly it's not sexy, because it's to certain groups it's anti-environmental, among other things. And just think about how quickly we had green policy, provincial green policy for energy manufacturing developed in the last 10 years in this province. Like it or not, we had it. It came very quickly because it was sexy to get going green. And we've got these policies, whether they're working or not, time will tell. But during that time, our auto industry's floundered, and there really hasn't been a whole lot done for it.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up, so we need to wrap up. But before we do, so let me invite you to go to thank our panelists for their fantastic discussion in the usual way. And I would add that the Chamber is going to issue a report based on today's discussion in about 2 weeks' time, and hopefully that report can form the basis to inform some of the candidate debate in the upcoming provincial election and discussion. And hopefully sometime in the not too distant future, there will be another policy. So thank you very much.